Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, or good evening, I guess, depending on where you're listening to us from, and welcome to the webinar on advanced features for FM power users from Nautel. I'm Chuck Kelly, and I'm located in Noblesville, Indiana. Jeff Welton and Leah Hassan are up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Jeff, good morning, or good afternoon, I should say.
It is good afternoon here, Chuck.
Good afternoon, Leah.
Good afternoon, Chuck.
Thanks for being with us. So the things we're going to talk about today this is an add-on webinar. This is going to add more information to a webinar that we did about a year ago on October 14th, if I recall correctly, of 2014, and it was Scott Marchand, myself, and Leah, and we talked about the initial release of the software advanced GV features and discuss the basics of those back a year ago. Well, some things have changed. Number one is that there's these things now also work on the NV Lite, and they will hopefully in the relative soon time frame also work on the VS. We do have that on the production and time schedule to try to add some of these features to the VS. So we're going to talk about the models supported and time frames for them. And then we're going to go into a live demonstration of simple site control, backup audio with auto return, oscilloscope functionality, and RDS-PS scrolling. And then we're going to take your questions as we always do. Going to advance the slide, Jeff? As always, you have the option to ask questions within your GoToWebinar software on the right-hand side, I believe, of your screen. There's a place to type in the questions, and after we're done with the presentation part, Jeff and I will go back and try to answer your questions to the best of our ability. And one way or the other, get you back answers, if not during the webinar, then afterwards. Next slide. So this is where we stood. A year ago, it was just the GV column, and that was these features came out with software release 4.0. And then not too long ago, we added these features to the NV Lite series, and that applies to not only new NV Lites going out the door, but also existing NV Lites. You can upgrade to version 4.3 of the software, and these features that we're talking about will apply and be available to you. And the VS is, as I said, more complicated. There's a software upgrade that's got to be done, and we do have it on the to-do list. We don't have a time frame yet. There's a lot of things going on here at Nautel development-wise. Also, bear in mind that the backup audio with auto return may require a hardware upgrade, and you'll have to talk to customer service when that software comes out to make sure that you're going to be able to take advantage of that. So our goal is always to try to make the new features retrofittable into previous products where the hardware allows it, and so that's continuous improvement. That's our perspective on things. Next slide. So Jeff, the first thing we want to talk about is site control, and that's a pretty exciting feature, something we've been talking about for a long time.
It is, Chuck. It's when we started with the NV series in 2008, we had a fairly advanced AUI and remote input-output interface on it. And one of the first things customers started asking us at that time was, well, we really'd like to be able to take remote inputs, because at that point we don't need a conventional external remote control. We can do it all through the transmitter. And so right. the GV was the first one to launch that, where we have the ability to configure custom inputs with external statuses. Now, it only does logic. It doesn't do analog statuses at this point. But for example, if you wanted to set a temperature alarm, you could put a thermostat with a contact closure to basically give you a status input whenever you exceed that temperature. And then over and above that, you can configure Boolean expressions so that, for an example, if you've got a generator and the generator's not powered big enough to run both your transmitter and your air conditioner, but does run an exhaust fan, then you can configure Boolean expressions to control what can happen under certain parameters.
Let me back up just for a second, Jeff, only because I've made this explanation just like you're doing, and it's crystal clear once you understand it, but I've made this explanation to people before, and I've seen their eyes glaze over, because sometimes this can be very complicated when we start talking about Boolean expressions. Let's go back to where this came from. This comes from the fact, as you said, that when we came out with the original AUI-equipped transmitters, while we kept what we would call the GPIO, the things you would hook up to your remote control, in the design, those contact closures and status outputs and inputs are still there, but they're not being used because people are not hooking up their existing remote control systems to their transmitters, or if they are, maybe they're using SNMP instead of GPIO. And so these things are just hanging out there doing nothing, and it occurred to a number of people that maybe there was a way to use that, and this is what we've done, is we've made them accessible to the AUI almost backwards. You know, it's instead of them being used to report the status of the transmitter and take external inputs to control the transmitter is able to send out information to control external things and is able to take external input, which is then being used to maybe make decisions on things that it does, or to send emails or notify people in some fashion. So it's really adding a feature to the transmitters that people are not even paying for. It's just there, and it's part of the design, and it really is dependent on the cleverness, if you will, of the user. And we don't give you all the ideas of things, with the exception potentially of this webinar, of how to use it. It's up to your own ideas.
Well, that's exactly right. Yep, you've got it in a nutshell. And for example, if I go to a transmitter screen, and I'll flick over here really quickly, we're going to switch back and forth between the AUI and the presentation a few times.
Yep.
We can go into the menu, we can go into the remote I/O, and we've got the ability to select custom inputs and assign, like if we take in a remote I/O that's not assigned, we'll go to site control, for example, and you can see we've got a couple of configurations set up. I'm going to skip back to the presentation so you can see the exact layout we've got before I confuse the issue too much further.
Okay. You know, one of the interesting things from a terminology standpoint is the word configurable is very similar to the word complex, which is also very similar to the word confusing. So it's really important that we are as clear as we possibly can be. So what we've done downstairs in this demo, and it's just an example of what can be done, may not even be a good example, but it's an example where we're actually understanding a scenario where we may want to use this technology. Jeff, why don't you talk about what the chief engineer, the mythical chief engineer of this mythical station, is trying to accomplish by using site control?
Okay, well, and as an example, what we've got here is that if you've got a high site temperature alarm, your thermostat said, hey, it's too warm in here, and your exhaust vent's closed, and in this case your generator's off, then activate the air conditioner. So we created a Boolean expression, and I hate to use that word Boolean because, again, like confusing, complex, etc. But we created an expression where if the site temperature alarm is too hot, so we have an external thermostat alarm coming in, programmed as an input,
right,
and the generator status is off or false, then in that case it generates our first air conditioner statement. Then from there we have one where if the first air conditioner statement is true, so again, site temperature high and generator off, and the vent open input So we've got another status input coming in from an air vent louver, for example, is false, so that our air vent's closed. Otherwise, we don't want to turn the air conditioner on. Then in that case, assuming those cases are met, we turn on the air conditioner.
Okay.
And that's done. So what we did, we created 2 site rules and programmed 3 inputs to meet these situations. And let's see, I think it was 7, 8, 9. I might be wrong.
I believe that is correct. You're right.
8, 9, and
vent open.
Site temperature too hot.
Yep.
And generator on. And what we did, going back to the schematic really quick, you can see all we've done in our situation, because of course we're in a laboratory without a whole lot of generators and air conditioners and things available. We're just using switches in this case.
Right.
So
which is where Leah comes into play, because she's going to flip those switches for us.
Well, and for example, right now, if Leah was to flip the switch, you can see, let me get back to the AUI. You can see in this case the generator on status is active low and it's currently high. So right now the generator's not on, and now you can see our generator just came on. And our status has changed to 0. So in that case, we're starting to meet the conditions of our expression that's designed to control the site.
Okay.
So as you said, it's one of those things that's kind of limited only by the creativity of the person doing the work and what they want to accomplish with it.
Like so often with computer-related concepts, you're really limited to being able to succinctly describe the exact conditions that you want initially. So when you sit there and you've had a transmitter, you've had some high heat situations in your transmitter site, you might sit down and say, okay, what do I want to assure happens, and how am I going to make that happen, and how can I use this technology to make it happen without buying new equipment?
Right, and I mean, in the very simplest aspect of it, you might have just a cheap thermostat that you bought at Home Depot or wherever, put it on the wall, used a contact closure out of it to trigger a remote input that sends you an email to say, hey, the temperature's too high, maybe the air conditioner's down.
Right.
And you could take it a step further and use that to fire an output to activate an exhaust fan in the building.
So you've configured your remote inputs, and that's the first step in this process. Once well, I should say the first step is to state the problem and then state the conditions that you want to have things occur, so you can figure out the flow chart, if you will, of exactly what you want to make happen. Then the very first step in configuring your Nautel transmitter to do this within site control technology is to configure your inputs, right?
Right. On with a pen.
Not sure if I'm losing you or what, Jeff, but you're not clean on my end in terms of audio. Leah, can you hear me okay?
Okay, are we back?
We're back. I hear you.
Got the message that said my audio connection had been lost, and then 5 seconds later it said restored. So
perfect. Okay.
We're going to bring it on. But
go ahead.
So basically, once you've drawn out your flow chart and figured out what conditions you need to have met, what inputs and outputs you need, then at that point you can step in and assign them within the user interface, within the AUI. And the first steps are to assign your inputs and outputs before you build your site control statements.
Actually, the next step is remote outputs, because you've got to configure your outputs before you can set up the site control. Otherwise, you can't tell the site control what to do.
Right. Sorry, I ran that sentence together. But yes, configure inputs and outputs before you do site control.
Okay. Yep. So let's talk about, for a second, we've got a couple of outputs on this, at least one, which is turn on the air conditioner. And let's look at that one. There it is. That's the custom output, and that's configured in here. Now, one important thing to tell people, these outputs are just not contact closures at all. They're just simply open collectors that pull a signal to ground. You're going to have to provide some level shifting and some protection for the kinds of voltages and currents you might need to encounter in order to turn on an air conditioner.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you're going to be running a fairly high current device, then you're going to need either a solid state relay or a PLC or some sort of device like that.
Right. Okay, now we go to site control.
Okay, so once we're in site control, for example, just on the very simplest level, we'll take one, we'll design an output and call it, just call it generator alarm.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll give it, we can select the severity. I mean, that's how it displays on the user interface. We'll call it medium, make it immediate. We can make it latching. We can assign it to the system logs so that if we look at the transmitter logs, and it will tell us whenever this alarm's been active.
Right.
And we'll tell it, in this case, we'll scroll way, way down. Let's see, I don't want presets. Leah's going to step in and correct me in a moment because I'm doing it wrong, I know. Somewhere in here I should have a generator status.
It should be under custom, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it was down there. Oops, there it is, controller.
Yep. So
generator on is true, and in this case, because I'm not doing anything else with it.
You're not going to have a Boolean argument.
Right.
Yep.
All I'm doing, logging when the generator comes on. From there, I can go into the email notification and tell it to email me whenever that alarm comes on.
And incidentally, you can see because of the check mark over in the right-hand column that the generator is on. The mythical generator is on in our setup at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. Anything more we want to talk about in site control?
The challenge with talking about it is, as I said, it's so specific to the sites and what individual people want to do. As I indicated, we are looking primarily at digital inputs, either highs or lows.
Yep.
Not analog inputs like a temperature reading, for example. You'd have to have a temperature alarm with a contact closure.
Yep.
Easiest way to do it, just to keep it consistent, is use closures to ground and just wire them in, similar to the very cheap and dirty picture that we've got right here in the diagram on the slideshow.
Great. So let's go on to the next slide now, which should be having to do with audio switchback, because that's another feature that was requested many times, but is actually pretty complex because of the complex needs that people have. And let's go back and historically and mention that we've had what we would call audio loss switching or mod loss timeout for a long time, and going all the way back to the NV. And basically what that allowed us to do is to detect silence in the on-air signal and make a switch in presets to a different input. The frequency and the power and all that is all the same, but the audio input is changed so that it could possibly go to a redundant STL or some other audio source and put that on the air. But what that meant was there was no automatic way to switch back. If you wanted to switch back, you logged into the AUI or went to the transmitter site and switched it back manually to the previous preset. But what people really wanted is audio switchback. And with the GV, and now on more of our product lines, this feature is now available. And it's accomplished within a single preset. So this is the preset screen for the screen we're talking about, and the primary audio source is multiplex. So you probably have a multiplex or composite STL bringing the audio in, or you've got your audio processor at the transmitter site and you're bringing the multiplex signal in. If that multiplex signal goes away, it switches to the analog left and right inputs and automatically goes to there. But anytime the multiplex comes back, it switches back immediately.
Well, that's correct. And we've got it configured right now. If you look at the little flow chart at the bottom of the screen, to do exactly that. We take it a step further because the auto audio return, rather than taking the switching system that we had originally, where if your audio went below X% for Y seconds, it switched to another audio source or to another preset or whatever you told it to do. Now we've added this as a totally distinct feature, so the other one is still there, which means you can have belt and braces. You can have 2 layers of audio backup over and above, and that's what the little flow chart at the bottom of the screen is showing. We've got 2 presets, both with composite as the main audio source. If the composite fails, it'll drop to the left mono in this case. And if there's nothing there, it will switch to preset 2, where if composite's still not there, it'll drop down to USB audio backup. So it, and then again, if the USB audio backup is, as long as that's there, if the composite comes back, it'll auto switch back to the composite, which in this case will be in preset 2 rather than preset 1 because we've done a failover. But it gives us the ultimate level of backup, because not just do we have going from main to standby and back, but in the extreme case that main and standby are both down, we can run to the USB stick and still have something on the air.
Yep. So again, because people's needs are complex, there's a lot of configurability in the system, and probably the most important step in the whole process is actually figuring out what you want to have happen in various different scenarios and then designing your configuration to accomplish that.
Exactly.
So let's let Leah go ahead and show us how that works.
All right, well, I'm going to click over to the AUI, and as you can see, right now we're in preset 1. We have a 1 kilohertz tone that you can see on the oscilloscope.
Get a little closer to the microphone, Jeff, if you don't mind.
If I was any closer, never mind.
Better.
Okay, so we've got the 1 kilohertz tone as our MPX signal. We're running a 2 kilohertz tone on left audio, and then we've got a little audio clip on USB. So if I were to kill the primary MPX, the main audio, in about 10 seconds you'll see the backup audio come up, just because that's what we've got it set to. And
which
now
is
you
2 kilohertz.
Our 2 kilohertz tone, exactly.
Right.
And if for some reason that were to fail as well, then actually I should let Leah discuss this, because she's down there and knows what she's doing.
So I've just killed the mono left signal. So in about 10 seconds, the mod loss timeout will kick in and bring up the USB signal, which now it's playing that. Right now we have a USB MP3 that's a 15-second clip. I've just now turned the mono left back on, so when that 15-second clip ends and then there's silence, the mod loss timeout will click back in again and search for something on preset 1.
Right.
And so now it's gone to preset 1. There isn't the MPX still, but we do have the mono left signal with the 2 kilohertz tone. And now I can put the 1 kilohertz tone back on, and it will instantaneously come back up to that. So as soon as we get that primary signal available, the transmitter goes right to it.
Thank you. Very powerful. Okay, let's talk about the oscilloscope since it's in front of us here. Jeff?
Oops, there we go.
Jeff. There you go. Okay.
Yeah. The oscilloscope gives you the ability to look at a few things. I'm going to maximize it so it's a little larger.
Mm-hmm.
We can look at MPX audio. We can look at left-right audio. We can look at pre-correction. I'm not going to go there right now because we're running analog on this, not HD. It's a little less issue. But for example, if I hit the apply button, and I may have to hit start again, and I probably broke it one more time. I'm batting 1,000 for breaking this week, by the way.
Doing this, it requires expertise.
There
you go. You got it.
Okay, so we've got the ability to look at an oscilloscope picture of the audio. Leah, if I could get you to switch us back to the USB audio, and I know there'll be a couple of seconds delay while we switch through the different audio waveforms. And we go our 10 seconds and get back to our, here we go, we're just kill it all and make it go over there.
What's nice about this is test equipment that you have already configured up inside the transmitter that you can see from wherever you are.
Right. And one other advantage to it is that you've got a stop button, if you will, that lets you take an instantaneous snapshot of the audio waveform at any specific time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got us right at the end of the audio clip. Thank you, Leah.
Okay, let's go back and talk about RDS.
All right, I'm going to jump back up to our slideshow, and there's the layout on the audio switchback. We've pretty much covered it in detail.
Yep.
How doing the RDS is pretty basic. When I'm on my screen showing the AUI, you can see a little Skype window in the top left corner, and that's just a webcam looking at the RDS monitor that we've got down in the lab.
Yep.
Oops. Oscilloscope.
That's what we were showing before. Yep.
Okay, so RDS, we've done some significant improvements to the RDS. We now support PS scrolling with 2 speeds and either advancing by word or character. We can do radio text now, and you've got a whole bunch more alternate frequencies for folks doing frequency hopping networks.
That was requested by a number of our European customers.
Exactly. It's pretty popular in Europe and that part of the world where, you know, when you're starting to run out of range of one signal, it will jump you right directly to the next signal in that network.
Yep. Okay, is there another slide that shows us how this is schematically configured? Yep, it is.
There,
right.
Sure. And basically the same deal. We're running preset 3, which is the 1 kilohertz tone and RDS enabled. And the RDS monitor is just being fed by the MPX output from the exciter, although you could be picking it up off air if we weren't running to a dummy load and had a receiver that could get through all the noise of a whole bunch of transmitters being tested at once.
Right. All right, let's go to the videotape.
All righty. So going to the AUI, setting up the RDS is pretty straightforward. And I'll be the first to admit it's a shortcoming in the manual that we are looking at is how to get the detail you need. But the first thing you look at is your data source, whether you're using the internal RDS with our PS fields and radio text fields, or whether you're using external RDS.
Also known as dynamic RDS?
Correct. If you've got an automation system that kicks out artist and song title either over serial connection RS-232 or over an IP link, then you've got the ability to feed that directly to the transmitter without requiring external componentry. And again, over serial or IP. If you are selecting serial as an example, then you will need to match the baud rate depending on, of course, the speed at which it's being sent from the automation system.
Right.
The next field, the PI code, is basically the call sign. In North America, there's a website where you can look it up. I assume something similar for Europe and the rest of the world. So you'd look up your PI code for your specific station and enter the hexadecimal version of it there, not the decimal version.
Right.
All right. PS name is just exactly what it says.
And incidentally, that's what's being displayed on the Skype camera on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. The PS name, isn't it?
Yep, that's correct. Good. And you do a scrolling PS name, and if we can switch down to the scrolling PS name, that is the long form message. And you just type it into this field, and I've got to turn it on. We'll put it on fast. It doesn't go that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And
you have to save it.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Actually, let me put this back to internal and save.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
See the message starting to go through there.
Yep.
Now, we've also, beyond that, got radio text. And if we can switch down to that.
There you go. Looks like a Bell R monitor we're looking at up in the upper left-hand corner, as a matter of fact.
You know, I don't remember, but I believe you might be right.
Just looking at the fonts used and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that can be dynamically changed. If I wanted to get rid of the It's October 7th and just say you're watching a Nautel webinar and save it, then it changes on the fly.
There you go.
All right. The other things are fields that were there and exactly the same in the original iteration of RDS, PTY, music or program type basically, whether music or speech, traffic info, and the things, we don't use these things so much in North America, but alternate frequencies, as we mentioned earlier, we can now support 25 versus 6 in the original iteration. The rest of it hasn't changed much.
Yep. Jeff, I happen to notice that we've got quite a good list of questions already online, and so I think we probably ought to switch over and start answering questions. And I see the first one. I see the first one from Steve, who says, "When will you transition off Flash? Flash is bad. Fewer and fewer browsers will support." We know, and we're working on it. I don't think you're going to see an answer real quick, but you will see an answer from us. In the meantime, if you're uncomfortable with using Flash as within a browser or can't, there's a number of browsers out there, for instance, for tablets or for smartphones that actually do translation, and they use a back-end off service to translate the Flash to an HTML5. So we are aware of the issue, and we're working on it, but it's unlikely to be. It's not a small process, and so it may take us some time. Any planned time frame for the NV series to add these features? You spoke about GV, NV Lite, and VS, but made no mention of the NV. Thank you, William. We're evaluating that. The hardware is different, and it may be complicated, but we'll see what features can be added at some point in time, and we'll do what we can do. We always try to support things that can be supported without hardware changes. Let's see here. He says broadcast tools smart relays will be good for this. I'm assuming perhaps that he's talking about where we're doing the translation of technology of level translation on the outputs. Do you think that's what he's thinking about there, Jeff?
I'm certain of that. Broadcast tools, the smart relays would work very well for this. Henry also makes one like that, as does who makes there's another one called Boxer Relays that does the trick.
Okay. Yep. So those are all good ideas. Thank you, John, for that comment. Switchback will be available for the VS series. Yes, and I mentioned that earlier. We're working on that software. Not quite sure when that's going to happen yet. Honestly, I can't really even give you a date, but it is intended to have that. There may be some limitation. In fact, I know there are some limitations about things that you can switch from and to. So, for instance, if you're bringing in LiveWire and you want to switch to the IceCast input, you can't use auto switchback because they're both actually interpreted by the system as the same input. So you've got to switch from one kind of input to another. So you could switch from AES EVU to any of the streaming or livecast or USB, or you could switch from one of them to USB or to MPX or something. But you've got to be changing the actual category of input when you switch.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gino asks, when you lose MPX, are you saying it can detect silence on MPX, or does the MPX have to be completely gone? Actually, that's a really good point, Gino. Thank you for that. You have to be able to set the threshold level, which is configurable, above the level of the pilot. Because when you're looking at MPX, the pilot is also considered as an input. So if you've got a 9% pilot, for instance, and you set your threshold at 5%, if the pilot doesn't go away, you're never going to switch, even if your audio goes away. So you've got to set that threshold for audio above the 9% pilot. Does the switchback apply to the VS300 Lpfm, say from analog inputs to USB backup and return to analog? Yes and no. Again, we've got a software upgrade that's coming out for the VS series, which hopefully will be version 4.3, and that version is where we intend to have this functionality in there, but it may not be, we just don't have a time frame at this point in time. Is there a timing value that would have it wait so we wouldn't be switching back and forth if the primary is intermittent, etc.? Thank you, Ben, in Philadelphia. Yes, there is a timing input when you go from primary to secondary, but I don't think there's a timing value if it's returning back. And that's actually the reason why we initially configured it up so that it wouldn't auto switch back, is because if you had an intermittent input, that could be pretty frustrating. But there are a lot of people, and if you don't want to have that, then I'd use the mod loss timeout feature instead. Do you agree with that, Jeff?
Yeah, that's one of the things I was thinking, because on the auto backup, it does automatically go back immediately as soon as it senses the primary audio is there. But if you use the mod loss backup, I'm going to flick back to my other screen here very briefly and go under other settings. Then at that point, you can tell it that if it goes below a certain percentage of modulation for a certain period of time, to switch to the backup, and if there's worry that your main audio source may be intermittent, rain fade on a satellite feed, for example, then I'd be inclined to use the auto backup because it does not revert at all. It requires a manual back if you set it up that way.
And that also answers Jim's comment about asking us to show how to set up the delay parameters before going to USB, for instance, audio. Steve asks, it would be nice if the settings in one preset flowed to the other presets, i.e. RDS settings, so if you're setting up multiple power levels, you don't have to keep filling in the fields. I believe you can do that with the Save As feature, can't you, Jeff? You can configure the very first one and then save as, making the changes each time, and you're not really having to go back and fill in all the fields again.
For example, I'll take the RDS field here, and if I want to go in and change it to a different RDS name or whatever, I got a change, so let's just call it web. And I can do a save new and give it, call it RDS2, and OK. And at that point, I've got another option. Everything else is identical, the audio source, all of the audio backup settings. The only things that would be different are the ones I physically changed. So it's almost like a clone feature.
Yep. Ted asks, or Ted confirms the concerns about Flash, and he's asking if there's any kind of specific Nautel iPhone or iPad app to control the VS300 Lpfm. No, there's no Nautel apps. But there are apps out there that, again, do flash translation, and I'm trying to remember if I can find on my phone here real quick what the name of one of them is. Puffin, I believe, is an app that you might be able to make work for. I know it works in Android. I'm not quite sure about the Apple, but I believe it is also available for Apple or something like it. And it basically uses. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but in the last Nautel Waves newsletter, I did an actual article about that.
Oh, perfect. Can you summarize it real quick?
Yeah, my favorite's Flashbox.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that works on an iPhone, does it?
I don't know about iPhone for certain. I know for a fact it works on the Android platform, and it'll work on a BlackBerry running Android because that's what I was doing it on.
Okay.
There's another one called, well, somebody had mentioned it earlier, Photon, I believe, does run on the iThingy platform.
Okay, great. Bob asks, we're using an NV 7.5 for our RDS, and it only shows every third song title and artist that is being sent from our wide orbit automation. Any thoughts on why?
I do.
No?
Yeah.
You do? Go ahead, Jeff.
I've run into it actually pretty recently, so it had to be recently or I wouldn't have remembered it. But one of the things I've run into with a lot of automation systems is that if they're not configured to send the artist and song title once at the beginning of every song, they'll send it over and over and over again, and they overwhelm the input on the transmitter with data.
Right.
So make sure your automation system is set to send the information once at the beginning of each change, whether it's a song or a spot or whatever, and not to keep banging that information over and over and over, and that should help that problem.
Yep. Guy's got a question on VS300 Lpfm, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the 300 Lpfm specifically. He says, we use a Comcast internet connection for remote access and control. It's on a static IP address. There's an FCC requirement to be able to shut down the transmitter within 3 minutes on demand. How would you suggest meeting that requirement, particularly if the Comcast internet connection is interrupted? So my understanding of the FCC rules, you're right, that you need to be able to shut down the transmitter remotely, and most people that I've had work with this kind of thing in the past have to sense whether the internet or whatever control path they're using is working, and if it doesn't work, then theoretically they're supposed to shut down the transmitter if the path isn't, if the control path isn't operational. Is that your understanding too, Jeff?
That's correct, and I mean, whether you're talking control over IP via internet or whether you're talking dial-up remote control and backhoe fade, I mean, that situation's existed forever. I think we've all run into a situation where somebody with a backhoe or a trencher ended up cutting our control lines at least once, or audio feed, or pick one.
Sure.
So definitely the requirement does exist. You do need to have a reasonable expectation that your control link is stable one way or another.
Okay, Ted asked some questions about the 110-volt capability of the VS300 Lpfm. Wants to know if that can be retrofitted to their existing 208-volt equipped transmitter. If so, what would be the upsides and the downsides? And I'm going to have to check on that. I'm not sure I know the answer. I know that there's a software change, but I'm not sure there's a hardware change.
Yes, the physical power supply would have to be replaced with
the... Oh, that's right. It's an early style supply. That's right. Mm-hmm.
But
so you don't replace this power supply.
Right, and then just the software upgrade.
Then he's got some specific information about the current requirements and UPS suggestions and things like that. I think for those specific requests, I think we'd probably be best sending you an email, Ted, which we can do after the webinar.
Absolutely.
We've got so many questions. Another VS300 Lpfm question. RDS, for an Lpfm that wants to avoid impairing coverage area, how much injection is required and how might that affect coverage?
Do you have a location?
What's that?
Do you have a location?
No.
Because it's the same deal as running an SCA. You can increase your modulation by half your injection level.
Yep.
But coverage area, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference. X number of watts out is X watts out.
Right. Okay. Rodolfo asks, is this AUI available for the NV10 transmitter? Not all the features. A lot of the same stuff is in there today. We just talked about the NV series and the implications on the NV. I don't know whether or not how much we're going to be able to do on taking these feature sets as far back as the NV, because the hardware platform was completely different at the time. Is it possible to sync the RDS generator to pilot from a composite source or composite over AES? I don't know the answer to the question. We'll have to get back to you, Robbie. I don't think so, because what we're syncing to is our internal RDS generator, or our internal pilot, and I know there's a phase adjustment in there, but I don't know that we have the ability to sync to an external. I don't believe there's an external input that would be syncing to. So I would guess not, but we'll let you know. In transmitting in HD, do we have an option to send dynamic RDS as well as static image or message? Title and artist. Okay, so I'm assuming he's talking about the information that's going to the exporter, and that's a whole different question that has to do more with the exporter than it does the dynamic RDS.
We can start a dialogue on that by email. I mean, if you're talking running RDS on analog at the same time you're running PAD and artist song title information on the HD, that is more an automation system question than a transmitter question. We'll take whatever data you give us.
Yeah. There's a question about all caps issue with RDS over ASCII over IP be resolved. I don't know the answer. We'll have to let you know, Jeff. Thanks for the question. Ted asks, during a software upgrade, do the existing settings go away during the upgrade? Can the settings be saved in a file and restored? I just did an upgrade, and the settings did not go away. I did the upgrade yesterday on a VS300, and the settings did not go away. It just continued to work. And Dan said, Dan, thank you very much. Dan came back and said Puffin works just fine on an iPhone 5S. Jacob says, adds a vote for the Nautel app would be a wonderful tool. And Jeff, Ted wants to know a link about your article about my favorite Flashbox. So if you can send Ted that link.
Absolutely.
And Jorge says, I have a question of the RDS for HD1 and HD2. How can I configure all two for different programs? I don't know if it's possible on this webinar. No, it's a different whole thing. RDS is, HD has its own data path for information that looks like RDS, but it's not RDS. So RDS still exists for the analog. And we're going to have to figure out where we can get you some information on how to program the data channels that are sent in parallel with the HD channels.
I can take care of that afterwards in an email. It's basically a pad generator, program associated data.
And we have, how does the local RDS local echo work? Does this allow users to view the RDS on the transmitter AUI, and will it be added to VS later? That's from Glenn. And I don't know the answer to the question. I believe local echo is a throwback from other RDS generators where it actually, if you have local echo configured, and it shouldn't be, I've seen it where you see double characters every time. Is that your experience too, Jeff? Actually, yeah. You could try it. That's probably what you're doing, aren't you?
Find out what it does.
Yeah, okay, go ahead and click it and save it, and let's see what happens on the screen up there. Okay, this will be interesting. If everybody should be looking at the upper left-hand corner. Let's see what it says. I don't see a change. You see any change, Jeff?
Oops, sorry, I had my mic muted. Yeah, I say we'll have to do some digging in that and see exactly what the local echo does do.
Okay, and there's a question about Spanish interpretation. I think it's of the webinar. Unfortunately, neither Jeff or I are fluent, but we can certainly look at the possibility of doing a similar webinar to this, utilizing our Spanish-speaking folks here at Nautel. That's all of the questions that we've been able to get so far. An unbelievable number of questions. It's gone way too long, but thank you everybody for all of your input. Let's go back to the slides and make sure we've covered everything.
We've got the question screen, and there we go.
Okay, so this is where there's more information, and we will put that information up, and then go to the next slide, Jeff. And all the webinars are available. Here's how you can reach us via sales@nautel.com. I realize we've overstayed our welcome, but thank you very much for attending. This was a record-breaking number of people that attended this webinar, and we're very grateful, and especially for all the questions. And for those that we were not able to answer in detail during the webinar, we'll work on getting you answers via email. For Jeff
Chuck,
Welton, yes, go ahead.
I'm going to butt in right quick because
sure.
Leah's been in the background dutifully looking up the local echo function.
Oh, yeah?
Effectively, when it's enabled, the RDS port transceiver will echo all inputs controls received back to the terminal. So yeah, that's more a throwback to the to when you've got a local. It'll basically send back the data to the source.
Okay, perfect, excellent. Even more answers than I thought possible. Thanks everybody for Jeff Welton and for Leah Hassan.